for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I understand we have a motion to amend the agenda for the...
I'd like to add between items 11 and 12, I'd like to add one opportunity for public comments.
We have a second to that motion.
Second.
Any discussion? I think it's completely unnecessary and okay to not have public comments at one meeting, particularly a retreat meeting, but if you all want to do it, I will go along.
I don't expect anyone here.
You don't expect anyone here?
Yeah,
Okay.
so then it just shows that we had an opportunity.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
I agree with you. You know, we've never had comments in any of these type of meetings.
Yeah, and I think the concern, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, is that we didn't make it clear, A, that this was a retreat, and B, it still says on the agenda that we welcome public comments.
Absolutely, that would be it in one, that in a nutshell.
All right, any other discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so then I need a motion to approve the agenda as amended, please.
I make a motion we approve the agenda as amended.
Second. Go ahead.
Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, now I need a motion to recess into executive session.
Make a motion we recess into executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel, litigation and property.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Please record as a roll call, Sherry. That was a unanimous aye to go into exec. Okay, thank you.
We're gonna go downstairs.
David made all the motions.
Yep.
Got some copies made.
Now that you got copies made?
I have some copies made. I didn't get the cash flow and.
I got it, David, thank you.
I think it's back. No, it's not back.
Did you restart?
No, I did not.
Oh, was that yours? I just was asking whose that
I
was.
restarted.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Because you made a note on it, though. No? That one's mine.
Like 11 point something.
Yeah, you had amended that. There you go. That is it. I think so. I don't have it. There wasn't much substance on there, though. The documents, like there wasn't. Yeah. In the, what was online.
I don't know.
Oh, no.
There wasn't a whole, it wasn't like we had a big
No, it wasn't.
packet of
No, no,
stuff.
no. I don't.
Sherry made a copy presumably.
Thank you.
I didn't get the cash flow and then did Sandy make another personnel report copy? I thought that changed. We copied it, it's on there. It's passed around, okay, good. That's the only one I didn't have, so it's passed.
Member.
Okay.
Member.
We are back in open session. Everybody ready? Okay. And I'll just note that the agenda was amended to add a public comment area should someone decide to make, should someone choose to make one. And that will be after item 11. So we will make sure to give you an opportunity to speak then if you would like. Please stick around. Okay, so right now we are on item 10, board liaison reports. And this is only, this is a report from the policy subcommittee. There's only one policy that was provided in your packet, and this relates to the decision that we made to allow SSD students to bring their, to have their kids attend tuition free. We simply have to adopt the policy. You've had it for a while. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
As an
Otherwise,
anecdote,
go
as an
ahead.
anecdotal, now 18 to 24 county school districts are accepting these teachers' children. Staff and children.
Thank you.
And we, am I right in thinking we're talking about 2 children here?
Right now, we just have 2. Yeah.
Do we need a motion?
This is just the initial review, and then it'll be
Okay.
on there for the next time.
Okay.
Any ideas as to how many, as to whether there are other teachers who would also take advantage of this?
We surveyed every teacher prior to making the decision, and we had only heard from 1. So the second one was a surprise, and none of the others said that they would take us up on it at this point. which seems consistent. I think, Ladue had 1, Kirkwood maybe had 3, so a lot of the districts weren't seeing. And I think a lot of times the children are already in the system somewhere, so people don't want to uproot them. But we have one who I believe is a senior, and then the other one's younger, I think.
And you'd apply the normal rules that you apply to everything else?
Absolutely, absolutely. There needs to be space available. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
All right, item 11, discussion of relevant issues. 11A, board calendar. I requested that this be a standing item for the reason that Jean raised a point related to a calendar item last time, and I cut her off because it wasn't on the agenda. So I want to call your attention to a couple of things. First of all, the upcoming community engagement sessions at Bread Company. One's July 2nd, one is August 6th. We need to either find volunteers for both of those, or I don't know if we want to consider skipping the July 2nd one because it's 4th of July weekend. Arnold, thoughts?
I can handle the July 2nd.
You can do July 2nd?
I can do July 2nd.
Okay,
I
well,
can
that
do
was
July
easy.
2nd though, but I couldn't do August 6th.
Okay, can anybody do August 6th?
Let me look here. I'd be happy to do August the 6th also.
I don't have my phone, but I may be able to do it. So we have at least somebody, as long as we have one person. Okay, so then those will go on as scheduled. Can we please make sure we do a good job of publicizing that those are occurring, Kathy? So that everybody knows. I'm optimistic that we'll get a few more people.
Kathy, remind me to get your sign out of my car too.
Another suggestion is, I
Mhm.
know you've said Breadco for all of them. I would really like to have some other locations, like the Starbucks in Rock Hill may be a possibility. So just to,
I'm completely open to that. My hope was
because
to
we
get some
haven't had great
momentum, because we have, yeah.
turnout, to me, trying a couple of different locations and publicizing them more might increase turnout.
What do you all think about that? Should we mix it up or try for consistency? David?
I prefer, I think, consistency, and if we can then build up some momentum, I'd potentially be open to perhaps, in addition to doing that, perhaps add one at one of these other
Okay.
locations. But I would keep consistently, the first Sunday of the month at 2 o'clock, at 12:30 rather, we have board members at Redco, and then if we choose to add some others, that would seem to be reasonable.
I'm
But I
fine with
wouldn't get rid of these just so that you get it well known.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want people to go, wait, where is it again?
But if
Yeah.
you have 3 people, you could do it at 2 different places at the same time.
You could. You want to get
Yeah.
ambitious.
And I do know
You've got
once,
advertisement.
Yeah.
once Kathy brought the sign and we put the sign up where they can see it in the window, I did see head reading the sign.
Oh, good, good. Well, that's a start. We're making progress. Okay, so consensus is, let's leave it where it is for the next two, Jean. Well,
And then
I
maybe when school
appreciate-
starts to add another one.
Yeah, and I appreciate David reporting back on the feedback. I think that's important to make sure that whoever attends, if it's not David and someone else wants to be a note taker to share it with the rest of us, I think that's great. Other calendar item I wanted to mention was, first of all, it's not on here, but let's all give Sherry our sincere thanks for getting our room reservations at Tantera for the MSBA conference. You guys, particularly new board members, have no idea what a hassle it is to not be able to stay at. Well, Steve knows, you've done it. And so today was the first day that you could book hotel rooms, and I was bugging her at like 9 o'clock.
We all had it on our calendar. Sherry?
So anyway, thank you, Sherry, for doing that. Right now, everyone is registered. I hope everyone will attend. You all have rooms. We can talk about the specifics as the time gets closer.
Great.
And then the third thing was, this is supposed to be a retreat, which I always felt was a horrible misnomer, because my first year as a board member, I was expecting massages and spa. I was sorely disappointed. However, the purpose of this was to be more of a informal, not a, obviously Sunshine Law still applies, it's open to the public, but this has traditionally been done on a Saturday. Now, we tried to do this on a Saturday and our schedules just wouldn't work. So what I'm wondering, tonight will be fine, but as a general matter, at the end of a long workday, I don't think any of us are at our best for making big decisions about the district's future. I would prefer to try to keep our retreats on Saturdays. And so I'm wondering if we should set out some times now, have John or whomever look at the calendar and perhaps pick a Saturday during which we would have a normal board meeting in January and then again in June. and just get those on the calendars early so that we can all plan around them. Just wanting your thoughts on that. David
Let's
nodding.
put something out.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right, good, thank you.
I got one calendar thing too, watch
You got it, okay, no, I'm done.
The other calendar thing that I'm going to put out to you as well is we are moving to board docs for all of our board documents and everything. We're one of a few school districts that doesn't use board docs. And what we need to do is we need to have a training for board members the week, and they're looking at the week of August 7th, which I know is hectic with back to school. That it would kind of serve as the purpose unless we needed a board meeting at that time. Traditionally, that's been the time in the past where we gathered at Hickson with administrators, just some informal type stuff, and then, but this would be just kind of a training, so it wouldn't even be a board meeting. So I'll send you a little calendar invite. Is 6 o'clock, is 7 o'clock, what time do you want me to set for that? Is there, for that training? It's about an hour and a half.
7 would be fine.
6, 7.
6:30 or so.
Split them in the middle?
Six is relatively hard for me.
Yeah.
This is the week of August 7th?
Yes.
Oh,
So what I'll do is I'll send,
my opinion may not even be, I don't think my opinion is even relevant that
Are
way.
you out of town?
We've got two out of town. Do they want to do a different week?
We could try and do a different week.
It would have to be afterwards, not before.
What we might do is we might do it, he's not available the next week, which would be the week before our first board meeting, so we could go old school paper maybe and just find a time after the 22nd to do the board docs training.
What
Is that
if we
okay?
came-
He can split it into 2 sessions.
Is he physically gonna be here? Will he physically be here?
Yes, yeah, it's an on-site training. What'd you say, Sherry, what'd you
You
say?
can split it if there's some board members that can't attend, we just have to find another date.
Yeah.
Is it that tough that,
People said that they would encourage, I talked to the superintendent in Clayton, he said, I would really encourage them. There's a lot of features within it, so it's not just being able to download, which you're all capable of, but getting a few clicks down.
Is this something that only board members use, or will members of the public use it too?
Members of the public will go there to view all the board documents, the board information. We'll be able to upload audio, visual, it'll all be attached to the same meeting.
And is that fairly self-explanatory?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Mhm. So I'll shoot for some dates and times, maybe after that August 22nd in a non-board meeting where we can come together and look at that.
So to Amy's point, will we put something out so people who want to be able to navigate it, who haven't been to the training, will be able to sort of get into the things they want to get into?
Yeah, the public?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Great.
Right,
That's
any
it.
other calendar items? All right, 11B, Finance and Facilities Planning. I believe, who's up on that?
Mr. Ellerman.
Mr. Ellerman.
Going to dim the lights because I have some overheads in the presentation that were not included in the board materials. So I want to make sure that they're visible. Of course, I can get copies of the presentation slides if somebody wants a copy of them later. But good evening and thank you. I feel not quite as prepared for this as I was hoping, although the materials were all prepared. My remarks aren't as prepared as I thought they would be because I spent a lot of today with our district's attorney on other issues. But I think what I have put together, is my understanding, this is a workshop, not just a regular board meeting. So what I've tried to do is put together something that is informative and educational, but also a little bit on the fun side. Because this can deal, finance and facilities and planning for the budget can certainly be not fun sometimes. And two of the primary board responsibilities each year are adopting the district budget and setting the district tax rate. And those two things are coming, are maturing very soon. The district will be adopting the 17-18 budget at our next board meeting, June 26th, and then the tax rate hearing where we set the 2017 tax levy will be following soon after in September. So what we wanted to talk about a little bit tonight is giving some context to what that budget, how that budget was created, and why the funding is where it is, as well as then how that translates into the setting of the tax levy later on this year. Because it's interesting that the budget has to be adopted before the tax levy is set, but yet the tax levy has to be set in a way to fulfill the budget. So in some senses, the timing of that is a little bit out of sequence, but that's the timing that's actually set out in state law, that the budget is adopted before the new fiscal year begins, and yet the district doesn't have good enough information on its assessed valuation and so forth to be able to calculate what the legal tax levies are until August, September. So we have to adopt a budget before we know that with certainty. So a fair amount of planning is important for that. So what we wanted to do tonight was kind of go over with the board the things that we take into consideration as we're planning for the budget and for the tax levy and facilities, and how all those pieces essentially fit together in the district's planning cycle. So I've chosen to title the discussion, the workshop tonight, Advanced School Finance and Facilities, because we are kind of digging pretty deep in this. We're not just giving kind of an overview of the budget. We're going to talk about the distinction between planning for operating expenses and planning for other expenses that are more long-term, facilities, bonding related, and how those actually can work together. So that's kind of the grand plan dollars and cents of it all, and give reassurance that there is somebody driving the budget planning bus in a comprehensive and sensible way. It's a pretty complicated process, as you may know, and one of the things that I've have heard over the years, that when you're tackling a very complicated and long process, sometimes it's so overwhelming you don't know where to start. So when in a case like that, I've always heard, well, just find the beginning and start there. You don't have to solve everything at once. And so the beginning of the process is district priorities. And we're not going to talk about all of the district priorities, and these aren't all of the district. I didn't try to create a comprehensive list of district priorities, but just give you a sense of what those district priorities are. I think everybody can agree that we want to maintain educational excellence in Webster Groves School District. We want to continue equal opportunity, whether that, a lot of times you see equal opportunity, you think of that in terms of employment, but equal opportunity is also equal opportunity for learning experiences and education. We want to maintain a high quality workplace, clean functional materials, and we want to do all of the district priorities in a fiscally responsible manner. And that's what we really want to concentrate on, is that aspect of district priorities, is fiscal responsibility this evening. So what does fiscal responsibility look like? What things do you have to have in place, or characteristics does an organization that's fiscally responsible have? So when we look at it, at least in Webster, the way that we're defining it is that sustainable. The district's budget, it needs to be sustainable, that it needs to create financial stability for the school district, so that we're not going up and down each year, that class sizes are high one year, low the next year, or we're doing well one year and then not as well the next year, but kind of trying to create a sustainable, stable kind of a line with ensuring operational efficiencies, that we're running operations as efficiently as possible, and being as good stewards with the taxpayers' money as possible. That involves program evaluation, not just allocating resources, but evaluating programs that are already out there. Are they accomplishing the objective? Are we being efficient with our dollars, but are we also getting results from the programs that are out there? And are we strategically allocating all of our resources among the priorities that are out there so that the district overall can move forward? And we're not just strong in one area but weaker in another area, but strategically allocating all of the resources so that that we're strong in all areas. That involves some element of tax levy management, because we essentially have two different levies. We have an operating levy and we also have a debt service levy, and those can work in conjunction with each other to make sure that we're operating as efficiently as possible and getting as much mileage out of our dollars as possible. And then finally, we don't want any surprises. There are no good surprises. You could say, well, if we get a windfall of funding, that we don't mind those kinds of surprises. But even those kinds of surprises, if they are foreseeable, that's not a good kind of a surprise, because if we had foreseen something that was foreseeable, we could have allocated those resources, and we could have more effectively planned for the future of the district. So no surprises. So we translate then, can translate those, that fiscal responsibility and how we define fiscal responsibility into specific budget and financial management strategies. So financial stability is accomplished through having a balanced budget, having sufficient cash reserves that we don't have to do interim borrowings during the year, because we have enough cash flow, enough fund balance in order to make it until through the lean months, until we start receiving the district's primary source of revenue, which is property taxes. We need to have enough money in fund balances as of July 1st to get us through December, when we start collecting property taxes. So sufficient cash reserves. We need to have some contingency funds. It's a big district, $60 million budget. There are unforeseen things that happen during the year, and we need to have some contingency funds for those. That can be manifested in a couple of different ways. One is just having a cash balance that's more than sufficient, than necessary for just cash flow purposes. If all we had was barely enough for cash flow purposes to get us to December, and then something goes wrong during that period of time, now all of a sudden that we have to address, now all of a sudden we don't have enough cash reserve in order to be self-sustaining. And so we need enough additional contingency reserve to allow for those unforeseen things that doesn't put the district plans off track. So we want to budget in a conservative but realistic way, both on the revenue and the expenditure side. We don't want to be overly optimistic of what of how much revenue we're going to get, but we don't want to be overly pessimistic either. We want to be close, but a little bit on the conservative side. And we need to have some flexibility built into the budget, so that as unforeseen things come up, there are areas of the budget where we can use to address those unforeseen items that might come up without immediately going into fund balances and pulling money out of there. Well, if there's an unforeseen need that comes up, maybe we can restructure what we already have budgeted to cover that, instead of just immediately going to fund balances. So we have some safety valves and some flexibility within the budget itself to be able to reprioritize on the go or on the fly to handle some of those things. And so all of this then also then leads into operations and bonding capacity working together. Yes, we can have a balanced budget, sufficient cash reserves, and have budget flexibility and all of those kinds of things, but it's still important for operations and bonding to work together in order to accomplish, to operate most efficiently and provide stability and predictability over time. So what does that look like? What is operations, the operating levy and the bonding working together? Because that's essentially the operating tax levy and the debt service levy. Here's like I observed, what you do matters, but so does how you do it. We don't want to just do things right. We want to do things right smart. My uncle Andy used to have an expression, well, still does, he's still around, about when you do something particularly clever, so well, that's a right smart way of doing things. And what I remember that on specifically is my high school car. 1966 Oldsmobile, and he got a great kick when he was up, and I had a flat tire on my car, and he was there when I was changing the tire, and I took this piece of cloth, a lug wrench, everybody's changed a spare tire before, I took out a lug wrench, and I took a piece of cloth, put it in the lug wrench before I put it over the chrome lug nut to loosen it, and that tickled him to death. He was like, "Why are you doing that?" And it's like, well, if you don't do that, you can break the chrome on the lug nut, and it starts rusting there, and now you've got a rusty lug nut. And he goes, "Well, that's a right smart way of doing that." So, we want to have a right smart way of budgeting. We don't want a budget that will start rusting around the edges, essentially. So as we talk about operating and bonding and the distinction between the two, the operating budget is meant to pay for ongoing kinds of expenses, staff, supplies, services, utilities, maintenance and repair, minor replacements and renovations, emergency kind of funding, and you can extend that list of what the operating levy goes to pay for. And what the bonding is meant for is major capital expenses. It's the mortgage kind of a thing. If you translate this down to your personal budget, you'll pay, you'll borrow money to buy a place, and you have mortgage payments. But for operations, you don't borrow money for those. You'll pay those out of just your ongoing income. But you borrow money for the major capital expenses. It's the same thing for a school district. The ongoing operating levy will pay for the normal operating expenses, and yet we borrow money for the facilities and the major kinds of expenses, and that's where the bonding comes in and the debt service comes in. And it becomes important to recognize the difference between operating and bonding because they are managed differently. Their purpose is different. Paying for annual operating expenses, whereas on the bonding, yes, the debt service levy is meant to pay interest and principal on bonding, but it actually serves a purpose that's even greater than that we'll look at in a few minutes. And one of the, if you go back historically, a tax rate used to be referred to as millage, that you would levy a tax of a certain number of mills in order to collect taxes. I don't know if that originated in England or whether that was a uniquely American term, but sometimes you hear it referred to as millage as well. So with that kind of in a context and the distinction between the operating levy and the debt service levy, I thought it might be appropriate to essentially refer to what we're going to talk about tonight as a tale of two levies. And part of that, going back to the millage, is also different mills for different bills. You have the operating levy, which pays for the teachers in the classroom and the instruction, and then you have the debt service levy, which pays for the facility aspect of it. And the important thing on this is how then does the operating levy respond during good times when assessed valuation is growing, and how does the operating levy then, how is it managed when in periods of decline? Because Webster's experienced both very recently. Sometimes assessed valuation and tax base is growing, sometimes it's declining. And how does the debt service levy how does the operating levy get managed in the good times and bad times? And the same thing for debt service. So essentially, continuing on, with the tale of two levies, in the best of times, in the worst of times. How does this work? For the operating levy, the voters approve the tax levy. What levy that the district would impose and collect taxes on, that operating levy is actually approved by the taxpayers. From the debt service side, they don't approve a debt service levy. The district may state a debt service levy, say that this is the debt service levy that we would plan to have, but what the voters actually approve is the bonds, a certain amount of bonded indebtedness, and then the district is actually obligated to levy whatever tax rate is necessary to meet the interest and principal payments on those bonds. So really, on one side, you're approving an operating levy. On the other side, you're approving a certain amount of bonded indebtedness for which the district is obligated to impose whatever amount of levy is necessary in the debt service fund to pay the interest and principal
Bruce,
on
just
that.
quick clarifying and kind of an analogy. So on the operating levy side, when the voters approve a certain levy amount, what that really is that's the maximum tax rate that they've approved.
That's correct.
But the board doesn't automatically set it at the maximum amount. It adjusts based on a multitude of factors
Right.
over the course of time. So you might never reach that maximum. So just because the district in the past has gone for a particular tax levy amount didn't mean that the tax rate was automatically going to go to that maximum amount.
Yes, and so the amount you cannot exceed that voter approved rate, kind of referred to as a ceiling.
Right.
The board can voluntarily roll it back.
Right.
Or there are certain required rollbacks to the tax levy that can be triggered, particularly in the best of times when assessed valuation is growing due to reassessment. The district is required to roll back the tax rate to the extent that that increase in assessment exceeds the consumer price index, or CPI.
Okay.
And that happens every other year, and in fact, we're going to see that in a few slides. We're going to see historically how that has played out and how that has influenced the operating levy every other year during reassessment years. Those are odd numbered years.
Thank you. I just wanted
Sure.
to get that clear, because I think there was some misinformation that was out there, assuming back 2 years ago that when we had Prop S and W, Prop S specifically, that it was automatically going to go to the maximum.
Yeah.
And it turned out it wouldn't have.
Yeah. The operating levy is assessed valuation driven. In other words, the operating levy can go up or down based on what the assessed valuation does. If assessed valuation through reassessment increases more than CPI, the district's required to roll back the voter approved operating levy in an equivalent amount. On the other hand, if reassessment results in a decline in assessed valuation, then the district is permitted to roll up its tax levy to make up for that decline, to the extent that that roll-up doesn't exceed whatever the maximum previously voter-approved levy was. So if you had a voter-approved levy of $4 that over time had been rolled back to $3.50 because assessed valuation was growing, and then assessed valuation, and there was a drop in the real estate market and assessed valuation decline, the district would be able to roll back up the tax levy up to $4, but not to exceed $4 to make up for a portion of that loss. And the reason for that is that the debt service levy is trying to create some stability to the operating budget so that it doesn't wildly fluctuate for what a district would receive in property taxes from one year to the next. Regardless of what the tax base does, there's a fairly steady property tax impact for the district, that the amount of collections a district can do, whether assessed valuation is increasing quickly or declining, the property tax piece is fairly stable. That's what it's meant to do, stability of revenue. Whereas for the debt service levy, it's debt driven. The amount of debt service levy depends on the amount of debt that you have outstanding and when the interest and principal payments are due. And if your interest and principal payments go up and down, your debt service levy theoretically could go up and down as well. So it's up to the district to structure its debt so that the debt service levy can be maintained at a fairly steady rate and still meet the interest and principal payments on the debt. So you need to structure the debt of the district in a way that provides for stability of the debt service payment. And that's, the WIT refers to whatever it takes. Whatever it takes to cover the interest and principal that's due on debt is what the district has to levy, and that's to maintain the credit worthiness and to secure and guarantee the debt, that debt payments will be made on time. It also reflects a distinction in operating expenses where they're more discretionary in nature. If we have to reduce expenses because revenues decline, the district has the ability to do that. We can cut staff, we can reduce instructional supplies, we can, and when I say staff, not just teaching staff, but administrative support staff. The district has ability to go in and manage its expenditures in a fairly short time frame if it needs to. Whereas on the debt side, there is not that discretion. Once you issue the bonds and it has a certain maturity schedule, we can't go in and change that unless we go in and try to call early and refinance and do a big refinancing. It's much more difficult in the short term for a district to try to change its debt profile than to change its expenditure profile. So that's a big distinction between the two as well. The operating levy is more, it can be managed through expense management. The debt service levy is managed through debt management and particularly no tax increase debt management. So we'll take a look at what that means. So NTI, especially NTI, that's the no tax increase. The operating levy, because there is more of a safety mechanism in the expense management side, the district doesn't need to maintain as much of a cash reserve because any unforeseen fluctuations in assessed valuation can be partially taken care of by rate roll-ups or rate rollbacks, but also by expense management, so we don't need to have this big cash reserve as the only weapon in our arsenal in order to try to manage unforeseen things that would happen. Whereas on the debt service side, we don't really have that many tools at our disposal to try to manage that, and so we have to keep a larger reserve in that. The cash reserve we try to maintain in the operating levy side is usually 30% or so. That's about where we are right now. But on the debt service levy, the state law would allow that a district could maintain up to 100% of 1 year's reserve in that, and that distinction is made because of the different purposes and that the debt service fund is less manageable on an ongoing basis, on a discretionary basis than the operating levy is. So let's take a look at what that actually has meant in terms of the district's levies over the past several years. We take a look first at the operating levy. You can see there's different rates for residential, commercial, and personal property. We're looking particularly at residential and commercial tax rates because they, even though they're slightly different, they tend to move in the same direction. And you can see that in 2007, which is a reassessment year, there was a large decrease in the tax rates for both commercial and residential property. That's because we had a good reassessment year. We were at about 470 residential, 496 in commercial, and those got rolled back by 70 to 90 cents because we had a big increase in assessed valuation. You see that in column 3. We went from $489 million to $591 million. That triggered a very large rollback in the tax rates. But when you look at the projected revenue then, that last column, in 2006, the district collected $30.3 million, and the year after, even though we had such a large increase in assessed valuation because of the rollback that was triggered, we collected 30.9, about $31 million. So you can see that that huge assessed valuation increase didn't translate into a huge revenue increase. It kept revenues fairly stable with a fairly minimal increase that essentially reflected the CPI at that time. And then we can look at the very next year. That's not a reassessment year. The only growth that we would have had that year was be through new construction. So you see we had a couple $1 million worth of new construction. And that year, the projected revenue went up to $31.4 million. And then 31.9 the year after that. The following year, in 2010, that's the 5-year cycle year. So you'll see in 2010, the rate jumped up significantly. That's because of a voter-approved tax levy. So that's what you'll see in terms of big jumps in the property taxes on the operating side. The only big jumps and drops would be related to either a rate rollback voluntarily or a voter-approved levy increase. So that's what we saw there. But once the district jumped up to $36.5 million, it's essentially stayed there with slow growth over the next several years. And you can see that as assessed valuations then started to fall, if you look at 2008, we were at 593. Then in 2009, a reassessment year. This is when the property tax, or this is when the real estate values started to fall. So we went from 593 million to 556 million, but our tax rate, we were able to roll that up to 432 and 436 to make up for that loss in assessed valuation. And it's basically continued to fall through 2013, 2014. The tax rate was voter-approved increase in 2010, but then also rolled up because of drops in assessed valuation after that. And we haven't, until just 2017, that's why I highlighted $770 million in total assessed valuation, that we have just recovered in 2017 to the assessed valuation level that we had in 2008, and actually exceeded it, $821 million. But that has triggered, because 2017 was a large increase in the assessments from 740 million to 821 million. It's triggering what we expect to be a very large rollback when we come to you in September to set the tax rate. We expect that we will be asking for the board to approve a residential tax rate of about 465, which is down about 41 cents from 2016 levels. And 476 for commercial property. The personal property tax rate is basically unchanged. Any increase in personal property is due to new personal property. Reassessment of personal property pretty much always results in a decrease, not an increase. So any increase in personal property assessed valuation is just automatically assumed as new construction, or treated as new construction. So you can see that essentially creates a very stable profile for revenues related to property taxes, with the big fluctuations being due to a voter-approved increase. And this is just graphically representing the same thing. A couple of the commercial rate and the commercial rate, as well as the residential rate, and then the personal property rate being the one that's the most stable. It kind of went up in 2010 when the voter approved the tax increase, and it's just pretty much stayed there. Whereas through reassessment of commercial and residential property, you get much more variation there. So we started out in 2006 at a higher level and immediately rolled back with the reassessment in 2007, and then it started rolling up because of declines, and then had a voter-approved tax levy increase where we pretty much peaked. A little bit of a roll-up then in 2013 or 2014. And then in 2015 and 2017, property values started to recover, so there was a rollback in 2015, and then a rollback in 2017. So you can see that after this 11 years, we've essentially wound up for our residential property and commercial property at about the same tax levy rate as we started with 11 years ago, after all of the roll-ups and rollbacks with assessed valuation increases. Yes, sir.
Does the personal property tax go through? Does that go through the same sort of cycle then as real estate, or just because I noticed that one hasn't seen the declines? I mean, is the amount of sort of assessed value of personal property, is that just sort of stayed level, or does this work by a different set of rules?
It works by a different set of rules only in the sense that any growth in personal property assessment category is considered new construction, so there's never a reassessment growth or a reassessment growth that would trigger a rollback in the personal property rate.
Okay.
And because the personal property rate is at our previous voter-approved ceiling, even if personal property values decrease, we can't increase we can't compensate in the personal property tax rate because that's already at that previous ceiling approved by the voters that we can't exceed.
Thank you.
Now, in comparison, looking at the debt service fund, we can see that there's a lot more stability with the district set rate. That's in the middle. It starts out, it's always been in the 56-cent range. And that has been a conscious decision by the school district to try to maintain a stable debt service levy. If you look at what the state auditor computed rate is, and that is a rate that the state auditor, that is computed that the state auditor will approve. It's a maximum rate, according to the state auditor's office, that the state auditor would approve if the district wanted to levy that in order to establish or maintain a one-year cash balance reserve. The district has instead of trying to maintain a one-year cash balance reserve and letting the levy fluctuate, accordingly, the district has chosen to try to let the cash balance reserve fluctuate and keep a steady levy. You can't do both. One you can keep stable while the other one fluctuates, but you can't keep them both steady over time because assessed valuation changes and also the annual requirements in terms of debt service payments. The way the district has its bond schedule structured is each year has a different amount of interest and principal that's due on bonds. So over time, what you can see has happened is that it's been pretty steady in terms of the projected revenue over the years, and just has increased and decreased as assessed valuation has increased or decreased. But what that then translates into in terms of operating balance, you can see here, and the next to the last column, the current end of the year fund balance in 2006-07, $2.8 million. We built up to about a $4.1 million cash reserve, which was almost a one-year cash balance reserve. We have about $5 million of interest and principal payments come due each year. So we almost got to a one-year cash reserve. But then what happened was assessed valuation started falling, and you can see we started running deficits in 2009, 2010 as that happened, and those started eating into the fund balance. The district did some refunding of debt in 2013-14 and 2014-15, and some of that refunded debt was still on the books and inflated the fund balance. So this included some debt, some pre-sold debt that was being refunded, and doesn't give a true reflection of what the district's fund balance was. What was actually happening, if you exclude the refunding, was that this trend going from 4 million to 3.4 to 2.5, that was continuing, but got masked by those refundings when you just look at the end of the year fund balance. And so if you took the $2.5 million in 12-13 and subtracted $800,000 or $900,000 from that, and then another 800,000 or 900,000, which was essentially the trend of running that kind of a deficit. Now we wound up at last year, June 30th of 2016, with only $196,000 in the end of the year fund balance. That's why earlier this year the board had approved a transfer of unspent bond monies over to the debt service fund in order to shore up this balance. And that was about $400,000 transfer that the district made, but that won't show up until this year's fund balance. We're projecting this year's at the end of the year would have a $1.4 million fund balance, but that assumes that the district, that assumes a couple of things. One is it assumes that the district continues its current debt service levy and doesn't roll it back. And it also assumes that we transfer $1.2 million from the classroom trust fund this year over to the debt service fund in order to shore up that balance. If we don't, and that will come to the board at the June meeting as part of the budget adoption, now that we see we're closing the current year with a surplus, we're going to propose that the board take $1.2 million of that surplus and transfer it over to the debt service fund, which is allowed by state statute. In the absence of that, we would be sitting at a $247,000 fund balance, which kind of begs the question, what would have happened if we hadn't have transferred $400,000 this year earlier of unspent bond monies? And the answer to that is we would have gone negative for the year in debt service fund, and that would not have been a good thing. Yes, sir.
So if you go back to the prior slide, I think that was the. So you're saying at the moment, so we've been collecting around $4 million, 4.1 a year, and what we actually need to collect is 5. Is that what would come? So based on the current ladder of maturities and interest payments and everything else, if nothing else was left changed, then then we should be we actually would need to collect around 5 every year. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, and so hence we're ending up with a deficit.
Right.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
And so now, if we don't roll back the bonds, then you'll be collecting 4.6 instead of 5. So you're getting a little closer, but not still running a little bit of a deficit. And so you're going to have to. Okay.
So if we look at 2016, you can see that we collected $4.1 million, and then in the following slide, we see that in, let's see, 16, we had a deficit of about $400,000,
right.
So that was at $4.6 million that we actually would have needed to collect that year. But another thing I'm glad you went back to this other slide is I wanted to point out CPI, because CPI, you have to roll back the operating tax levy if CPI based on CPI growth. In the debt service levy, you don't need to do that, but when you actually accumulate that, we don't roll up for CPI, we don't roll back for CPI in the debt service levy, while we do that in the operating levy. So I thought it would be interesting to compare what would have happened on that in the debt service if we applied that same principle. And if you look at the increase in assessed valuation from 2006 to 2017, it's a 22.5% increase over that time, to go from 631 million total assessed valuation to 821 million in assessed valuation. And if you look at what the CPI factor was in each of those years and accumulate those together, the cumulative change in CPI was almost the same as what our assessed valuation increased. So if we applied the same, and this was, the state law doesn't require it, but if we did, if we as a district, we said, we want to kind of let our debt service levy track CPI just like we're required to do with our operating levy, then maintaining that levy at 56 cents actually does track CPI over the past 11 years.
Do you actually get to collect the CPI every year, though, or isn't it you only get collected in the reassessment years?
In the reassessment year is the only year that it actually comes into play. And so that's really kind of a built-in disadvantage because inflation doesn't take a break in non-reassessment
Right.
years. District costs still go up. And that's always been a bone of contention for districts statewide is that, every year we only get to keep 1 year's worth of CPI, but somehow we have to fund 2 years' worth of inflation.
Sure, yeah.
And that's just been an ongoing kind of a contention, but there's no, that's.
That was a
that's
point
what
you
we
made in
left.
the last presentation you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
So I'm sorry to keep bugging on this. So one of the things you said earlier, though, was that we're required to collect enough to fund our debt, as we've sort of landed it out there. So why haven't we done that? Why haven't we sort of gone and set it? Why wasn't it set at sort of $5 million a while ago? Why have we been running these deficits and pulling it down from that?
So it was my understanding that when the districts would put a bond issue on the ballot for the public to consider and approve, it also said that this would be a no tax increase bond issue, and no tax increase meant keeping the debt service levy at its 57 cents. And so the district was trying to maintain that commitment of a no tax increase and dip into the fund balances. That's okay as long as you have fund balances that can sustain that. Fortunately, the curve just barely caught up at about the same time that the district was going to go off of the cliff. And so that's helping save us in conjunction with us transferring some unspent bond money over, and then also a little bit of the classroom trust fund. But we need to rebuild that, even if we weren't looking for trying to build up or trying to prepare the district for future no tax increase bond issues. We do need to build up the debt service reserve again to a reasonable level. That reasonable level doesn't necessarily have to be a year's worth. That's the maximum that the state auditor will approve, but it should be at least how much is needed to keep the debt service levy cash flow self-sufficient on its own, so that it doesn't have to borrow from the operating funds to make interest and principal payments before property taxes start coming in December and January. The debt service levy, or the debt service fund, is even more dependent on property taxes than our operating levy. We don't get any state aid, we don't get Prop C, we don't get tuition, we don't get all of those other revenue sources that help supplement property taxes on the operating side. We get none of that on the debt service side. It is primarily and almost exclusively funded with property taxes. So, and the debt service schedule calls for interest payments to be made in September and interest and principal payments every year in March. So what the interest and principal payments tend to be is about $1.1 million. That's why I had that figure up in the upper right-hand corner here. That's a minimum amount that we need for the debt service fund to be cash flow self-sufficient. We need to have $1.1 million in the bank in the debt service fund as of July 1st in order to get through and make September's payments of interest before we start collecting property taxes in December and January, which enables us to make the interest and principal payments in March.
And that's why you want to transfer.
That's why I want to and will be recommending we transfer $1.2 million. Well, that's part of the reason why I'm recommending transfer of $1.2 million is to get us to that $1.1 million level. But the second piece of it is it starts to create some future possibility of a no tax increase bond issue that otherwise the district won't have available for 8 to 10 years. There will be no, based on our projections, the district's not going to have any no tax increase bonding capacity available for 8 to 10 years without restructuring this fund, and this is part of that restructure. The profile essentially looks like this. If we maintain the current levy at 56.5699 cents, the debt service levy, this is a profile of the blue line is our revenues. The lowest line here is our fund balances. So you can see we're starting really low here, but we'll start building our balances up from this point forward. And this does assume that we transfer $1.2 million. of the classroom trust fund. That's why there's that little spike in the revenue there. That reflects that 1.2 million one-time transfer there. And this is otherwise the stable revenue line that just reflects assessed valuation growth expected over time.
So once we make that initial transfer, it'll roll on its own.
Yeah, yes, and then the yellow line here, this lower line, that is what our current debt service interest and principal payment requirements are. And so through the combination of making this one-time transfer and the increase in assessed valuation, what has happened is you see some daylight in between the revenue line and the expenditure line. If we didn't do that, if we rolled back the debt service fund levy based on CPI and only kept the CPI piece of it and rolled back for the rest, this is what that would look like. We would not have any daylight. Essentially, our expenditures and our revenues for the foreseeable future, as you see here, would essentially be equal, and we would just tread water for the next several years, and we would have no possibility of no tax increase bond issue. And it's not that the district has a plan for a no tax increase bond issue, but we are doing a comprehensive facility study. We know we have these other needs out there, and actually the bond issue and the operating funds can work together in order to maintain stability for the district. The bond issue doesn't necessarily have to be equated to building new buildings or classrooms or renovating something that's there. They can be energy efficient retrofits. There can be things that are replaced that are high maintenance cost things that the maintenance has to be paid out of the operating fund, but they've essentially reached the end of their useful life, and now they're taking a lot of care and feeding and expenses in order to annual repair and maintenance. And if we have a no tax increase bond issue to replace it, now it gives relief to the operating budget that we don't have to pay those annual repairs and maintenance. If we can do energy conservation investments that through a no tax increase bond issue, it will save us money on the operating side because our utility costs will go down. And so that's how they can work together to really be efficient, where at a no tax increase kind of a basis. So you can be smart in the way that you manage those two together to relieve pressure from the operating budget through no tax increase kinds of projects that can be done on the other side.
So as making strategic decisions today to prepare for tomorrow.
Correct. Yes.
Nice soundbite.
Well put. And so
So
what
Bruce,
happens-
I'm sorry, one other question then. So the place where you got, the fund though where you're getting these funds to go and supplement the debt service, were those grown out of operating revenues, those savings from operating revenues?
Yes.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Yes, that's where they would be coming
Mhm.
from. That's part of why we have a surplus this year, is through managing the operating.
I just wanted to make sure I was sure as to where they came, thank you very
Yeah.
much.
So what I have here is the yellow line here is the existing debt profile. The orange line here, and I guess that maybe I should point out one other thing. A good debt profile doesn't increase in the future because that makes you bet on the come. It makes you have to either have a tax increase or assess valuation growth in order to be able to fund the increasing debt service expenses. A better debt profile would be for something that looks like the orange line out here that declines over time. So that doesn't, and then as time goes on, the difference between the expense line and the revenue line, this represents no tax increase bonding capacity here. And we don't have that currently, unless we take advantage of the fund transfer and in conjunction with maintaining the current levy without rolling back for CPI. And so what I'm recommending for at least the upcoming year is let's at least keep this option open. Let's I'll be recommending that we maintain in the budget as well as the tax levy in September, that the district maintain its current debt service levy. Even if we don't have a bond issue in the future, we need that in our balances just to have adequate balances to service what's out there. And if we decide in the future that we're not going to need a bond issue, then we can always roll it back in the future and just maintain the fund balances where they need to be. But at least this will keep that option, at least maintaining the levy for now until we see what the comprehensive facility plan looks like and what our additional facility needs based on enrollment projections looks like, and whatever the other facilities and program priorities and implications on facilities would be in the future. When we can look at that in a comprehensive and thoughtful way, big picture, then we can decide what the long-term future is for bonding and for the debt service levy. What I built in here, what this orange line represents, is the additional cost increase if we did have a no tax increase bond issue. So if we issued new bonds, and this assumes about $8 million new bond issue in 2018, then the interest essentially is represented by this increase here. And you can see eventually it gets here. Most of this line profile is not created by the new debt. It's just layered onto the existing debt. So it's a hump that we have to get over. But with the transfer that we're making and very, very conservative estimates of growth in assessed valuation, that it can be managed. And what this actually includes is about an $8 million bond issue every 4 or 5 years for the next, and this includes 3 bond issues that we can do. And you can see that this fund balance, we can maintain over a $1.1 million fund balance even with that. If we maintain our current debt service levy, it gives us that option to do. And eventually we'll get out here to where instead of fighting against an inclining line, we will have a declining line, so that as time goes on, we'll always be able to layer a no tax increase bond issue without trying to get over a hump in order to get to that. So, but we have the existing debt structure that we have to digest first. And so that's created kind of a wave in front of us that we have to get over. And once we get over there, if we structure any new bond issues properly, it will smooth out this line. So you see, instead of the way the current debt is structured, it increases until it just basically drops and falls. Here, and that's not the best way to do it from a long-term strategic planning. Instead, it's have a gradually sloping decline over time, not run up at a high level, increasing level, and then just stop it cold turkey. Is just more transition it out over time so that you can manage it better with no tax increases over time. So it's going to take us a while to digest the kind of the legacy that we have out there right now, but I think it's manageable. So, that's essentially, that's the context that we wanted the board to have in mind when we bring the budget forward, because the budget is going to have the debt service levy, or the debt service revenues and expenditures as part of it that we'll be asking you to approve at the next meeting. And that assumes that we maintain the levy where it currently is. And then when we bring the tax levy to you in September, we would be recommending the same thing. But this is the context of why, because of these things that we're trying to accomplish. Not that we're positioning the district to go for a levy, a bond issue, but positioning the district, to be able to responsibly service what's already out there in a more reliable way, but also keeping that option open, keeping the option of a no tax increase bond issue open to the district until we know whether we need it or not. And then, then even a no tax increase bond issue would have to be put out to the public, and then the public decides, are these meritorious projects that we would approve or not? And so the district is, or the voters will still ultimately be the ultimate decision makers, even if the district ultimately decides that it would want to, that it has projects that would merit a no tax increase bond issue proposal.
We're using this strategy in conjunction with our enrollment projections. we can almost look at it and say our projection is going to require us to have new facilities. We're going to need new facilities at this point. Then we can almost determine our bonding ability with, to mirror, this is how this is what we need to build, and this is how we're going to pay for it.
Right, yes. So that really concludes what we wanted to share with the board for this evening. If there are other questions or further information that's needed.
I do have one last question. Early in your presentation, you mentioned about contingency funds. How standard is it for educational units to have we know that our lifespan of a widget is going to be another 5 years? Can you start creating a separate reserve just to start saving for that replacement of that widget?
Yes, you can. It depends on the district, how it wants to manage that. If you're talking about a widget that's a capital project kind of a thing, that's a large investment that would be handled through a bond issue, it's done by the very process that we were just talking about. Manage your debt service so that you have available to you a window to get to no tax increase bonding capacity, because that's much easier.
I'm talking about, a major area unit went out on top of the high school. It's going to cost something that's going to put a pinch in our budget. And we know that we're paying probably maintenance towards it every year, but there's a life expectancy on equipment. Can we save a certain percentage over time to say if we have to replace that, we have it already in the reserve?
Yes, we don't have anything like that now. We're trying to work toward that, and that's where I get into when you also saw flexibility, budget flexibility, that the district historically has not allocated a lot to building repairs and replacement, and that's gotten us by okay because our facilities 10 years ago weren't as old as they are now. But the district, in the absence of coming in with bond monies and addressing some of the aging equipment and infrastructure, the district is going to need to start allocating more of the operating budget to start handling that the aging infrastructure as it wears out. And so next year's budget, you're going to see that repair and maintenance account, the building upkeep, you're going to see that increase. And that's a piece of the contingency fund. We don't have a specific project that's earmarked for, but we know that the district infrastructure is getting older and it's going to take more, so we're allocating more in the budget toward that until we get a more long-term solution.
Got to minimize some of those surprises.
Yeah. And so that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is the operating fund balance itself. If we maintain healthy fund balances in the operating fund, then the first line of defense for something unforeseen is that amount that we allocated, that reasonable amount that we allocated in the first place. But if it takes more than that, then maybe we have to go one-time dip into the operating fund balances.
Okay.
I would think that the comprehensive master plan or facilities plan that you're currently working on with some other folks, that would be a factor. Brought into that would be, not only we see our current state, but what it could be in a best case scenario versus what it could be in a worst case scenario, and then quantify some sort of contingency numbers to say, well, we're looking at this as we know this is what we need, but we're going to put 10% on top of it or whatever that factor is as that contingency in case something else doesn't make it 7 years where we thought it would. It's only made it 5 years, so the contingency 2 years earlier picks up that.
Yeah, and the intent is for that comprehensive plan to be not just a one-time snapshot that then gets old.
It's a rolling
but it's a
replacement
rolling
and everything.
Replacement that it also then not just what needs to be done right now, this moment, but also looks at replacement cycles of looking down the road. And 5 years from now, even though this isn't an issue now, 5 years from now, you need to be thinking about allocating a piece of the budget in order to address this as it gets older, and to have that rolling, have it updated each year, just like we're going to do with the enrollment projections, is try to update those each year. Also update our comprehensive facility plan each year and have a component of it that looks out for future budget planning purposes as well, not just bond issues, but budget planning for repairs and maintenance and operations.
So is it worth building something, so your bond plan, what you said at some point, we don't have any bonds outstanding. I mean, there's nobody in this room who thinks we're never going to have any bonds because of the buildings we've got and the age. We know we're going to have to replace those. So is it worth, with building advisory and the comprehensive plan, going and trying to sort of layer in, I mean, you've got some degree of obsolescence for, not just for the widgets that Emerson referred to, but for buildings as well, and trying to build in something just sort of much broader in terms of realistically, if we look over the next 20 or 30 years, this is what we're going to go and need. We're going to need the facility to go and raise this sort of money just to keep where we are at the moment.
Yes, that's part of the comprehensive facilities plan, is to try to identify.
And so you'd then be able to come back with sort of that bond chart that's sort of reflecting the money you're going to need to raise to go and do those things.
Yes, that might be a slice, and so that would be a slice of, here's what here's what's needed according to the comprehensive facility plan right now, here's what's needed due to enrollment projections, here's what's needed for ADA, here's what's needed for other kinds of issues, technology upgrades, and then put those all on the table and prioritize them and make a recommendation at that time.
I really appreciate your argument for maintaining our current bond tax levy. You explained it really well. I don't know how you could have done better with more time to prepare, so that's out there. But back to the operating budget, my concern is that the state has not been very fiscally responsible, and their budget estimates are way off, and there's a big chance that despite voting for full funding of the formula, there will be withholds. So how conservative do you think our budget is if the state doesn't come through with the money that the legislature voted for?
I think that we've been fairly conservative, not just on state funding, but also in other areas. We're going to find, at least according to initial figures, that we'll usually wind up about $1 million under budget on the expenditure side and slightly over budget on the revenue side, which are both good things. We have not received the full day kindergarten money this year. We're not going to receive it by June 30th. That's still ongoing litigation. But that was about $1 million issue with state funding, and based on the preliminary figures that we have as of right now and what we think we'll receive by the end of June, our revenues will be within $1 million of what our budget was. And our budget included $1 million for full day kindergarten. So if we had gotten the $1 million for full day kindergarten, our revenue budget would have been probably a couple $100,000 over, which is within like 0.2% or something like that of what our budget was. Our expenditures it looks like we may come in about $1 million under on our expenditures, which with a $60 million budget is 98-point-something% accurate. So that gives us a little bit of a margin just there, but we also have fund balances as well that we can fall back onto. Even with the increase in state funding, the foundation formula is maybe a $7 million revenue item. And if the state cut everything by 5%, there's a lot of districts that are much more dependent on state funding than Webster Groves School District. 5% cut in state funding would be very disruptive to a lot of districts. To Webster, it's $350,000 because most of our money comes from local property taxes. So that's the good and the bad of local property taxes is, when you have these issues with state funding, the good thing is they don't really impact you substantially, even though it may be a substantial impact for most school districts. So $350,000 on a $60 million budget is like 0.5%, 0.6%. It's not a huge impact. So I don't anticipate that, even if there are withholdings, I wouldn't anticipate them being more than 3%. But that remains to be seen.
Okay.
And when I say 3%, 3% of the state funding, a couple $100,000.
Right.
Not that much in terms of actual impact on Webster because of the way that we structured the budget, conservative assumptions and sufficient fund balances to be able to take care of bumps like this.
Anybody else? Oh,
When
Arnold?
do you expect us to see the comprehensive building plan?
I expect that would be probably next April,
Okay.
next March, April, next spring.
All right. Thank you very much. That was very, very helpful, and I think it'll help guide our discussion on board goals as well as when we have to make a decision or approve the budget in June.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So the next step was to, or the next item was to discuss the board's goals for the 17-18 school year. And really just to have a discussion about them and where do we want to focus, where do you want to focus your energies?
Can I
Which
make
of
a quick comment about this?
Huh?
I just wanted to, I asked for this to be on the agenda, and I've mentioned this to probably several of you, if not all of you. I think we're past time to start looking forward. I think we've been looking backward somewhat following 2015, and some of the things that we had in terms of goals for the board didn't happen as a result of that election. And so I put this out there not because I have any particular goal in mind, but because I want us to talk about what we think our goals should be going forward. And so John has started with a list of some things that we had previously considered. Nothing is, on or off the table. We can certainly add to this list or take things off that we don't think are appropriate. I think tonight, I just wanted to start a conversation.
Cool.
So go ahead, John, thanks.
Cool, well, and that could, if we could just converse as well. I created a little something.
No, that's good.
No, that we could talk about as far as just kind of coming up with some, let me pass this out just so if you want to. Yeah, unfortunately our TV in front's not working.
Thank you.
But I thought prior to setting goals, it would be a good idea to kind of have some criteria that's used by which we vet the goals.
Okay.
So I just threw some draft ideas on there. One, our mission, vision, values, strategic plan. Two, what we see, what you perceive as be the impact of the goals. Three, the timing. And then I kind of have just a high, 5, a 3 average, and a 1 low, just if you were to rate that particular priority so everybody could kind of weigh in. And then the next thing would be to develop those priorities. So one of the things, I just kind of created an example right here as one of the priorities being that development of the comprehensive facilities plan, and then I just went across and just rated it. So how much does that align with our mission, vision, and values, a 5, and kind of so across the way. So my thought is if we kind of thought about what criteria do we want to have, and then we could list the priorities, then if it's an initial conversation, we don't have to vote, we could think on it, we can come back to it, or if we feel in a good spot, we can.
Do you have the initial list of goals in paper form?
Yes.
This one.
Yes. You know what, it's in that packet. Sherry, did you print that off in that packet? I think she did.
Is
You
this
did
it?
paper copies of everything?
No. Yours if you want.
Oh, that
I
is
think this is
not.
it.
Can you go run copies of
Yeah.
that?
Question, looking at your priorities there, is the strategic plan up for review in 2 years or next year?
It would be for the 18-19 school year, it would be new, so it would be up for review.
Up for review in the
Yeah,
coming
it was a
year?
3-year plan,
Okay,
yeah.
good, because I think that should be considered as part of our goal too, is
Yeah.
to make the tweaks necessary. I think there's a lot of good stuff in the, what was it, 6 years ago that
Yeah.
we did a really
Yeah,
comprehensive review and then added some other values and goals
yeah,
3 years ago.
yeah. So do you want me just to throw that down as a possible priority for next year?
I think so. I mean, because it'll obviously take a lot of board time if everyone's on the strategic planning committee again. At least have it on our radar.
Yeah.
So update strategic plan.
Yeah. And I'll share this thing that I create with you as well.
You know, and as part of that, even thinking, do we want a facilitator? Do we have an internal facilitator? Do we have an external facilitator?
Yeah.
Who do we have on committee? We're talking about, you know, committee assignments again, which committees are worthwhile.
Yeah.
So do we start fresh with a new strategic planning committee?
Yeah.
Or, you know,
Yeah.
keep some of the old members on that kind of discussion?
Yeah.
Jean mentions committees. I mean, should committees be a separate priority in sort of revisiting committees? I mean, it's something we've talked about a few times. Is that worth at
Well,
least?
that's on our agenda for tonight.
I mean, no, I know. And to the extent that we're sort of throwing things up there, I mean, is it worth going? And it's clearly not the same priority as some of these other things you're putting up there. But I think if what you're trying to do is just sort of gather a broad list.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
So, evaluation of committees?
Yeah, he'd written something up. I'm sorry,
Oh, I'm sorry,
John's
I
written
can't
something.
I'm typing, yeah.
Okay. Does everyone else have the board goals list, or is it just me now?
She's getting copies.
Oh, okay.
Sherry's making copies.
Well, I can throw a few of them out. So these were goals that we have discussed in the past, and the recommendation was to have no more than 3 to 5 focus areas for next year. And I think obviously a lot of these are going to be, or we may want to combine several of these. For instance, we have student achievement and innovation, both as, you know, the top 2, not necessarily, I don't think these are in order, but 2 of our bulleted items are student achievement and innovation. I think student achievement has to remain a goal. What that looks like, and more specifically what we hope to accomplish, I think is open for discussion.
I would agree.
Does anybody have thoughts on that?
Well, that's the purpose we're here.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.
The thing about innovation is I think the board is very clear that it's a priority for us, so we just have to make sure that it trickles down to every single teacher and aide, and librarian and staff member, you know, so that we make sure it's all over. So in some ways, I think you need to oversee that more than we do as a board. We'd like to see examples, of course, but I don't know what we can do to encourage it more than we currently do. So I would like to have some direction on what else can we do as a board to really make that a focus.
I would say some, just to toss this out as a response, monitor, I agree, it's ultimately going to be the administration's job to push that, but we can certainly make it clear that that's our directive and to monitor their progress and provide feedback.
Right.
David?
So presumably then the appropriate place for this is as part of John's goals, and almost as we're looking at just not only the board's goals, but John's goals as superintendent, we want to sort of keep that in mind, and some of it's just going to be in our role, reviewing what John is doing, making sure that we think he's got the right personal goals there as well. And so to that one in particular, I think perhaps John's goals is that it really is the appropriate place for that. I tend to think student achievement probably, it's incredibly important to the board. I think the way that we get there is by making sure it's, if not John's top priority, it's right up there on his.
All of it rolls downhill.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to, as we're moving forward with these goals, we've got board goals, we got John goals, we got strategic plan, for them all to be pointing in the same direction. And ideally, again, a fewer, more concise goals that we're presenting to you on and we're discussing on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So you're getting updates, so you're contributing to what we're doing. And I think that in itself, because I think what I've witnessed is anytime the board gives voice or attention to something, it really matters to like teachers and what's happening in the classroom. Like you don't always get to see it, but we see it, they feel it, and so I think the more we're talking about it and we have anybody in the audience, or the more topics or people are coming through and it gets communicated through the Times and other avenues, I think it's big.
Yeah, so what, Arnold, yes.
Yeah, just kind of listening to the conversation about that and trying to press these into a few. From my perspective, I view innovation as a strategy of student achievement. And so I just put down something, because there are a variety of them out there. Identify, develop, implement, and evaluation of strategies to improve student achievement, of which innovation would be one of those. And there are multitudes of those, but identifying what those are, developing them, implementing them, and evaluating them, because you can have a strategy and it may not work. Or you can identify a strategy and it's like, nah, that's not going to fit our need because we don't have that need in a specific area. And development would be professional development. Implementation would be how that works out in the classroom. And then how did it really work this year? How did it really work in the classroom? How did, did that work? We need to tweak it a little bit. Or that didn't work, let's change that completely. So there's a variety of things, and that's just kind of a thought I had on that.
I think the equity and student performance is under that as well,
Absolutely.
which is a good one, especially with our new proclamation. I think equity should be a big
I
priority.
was thinking that that should be a separate one though, and I was thinking equity, mindfulness, and social justice to somehow get into, changes in discipline policy, the whole, how are we reducing bullying, which is still an issue in some of our schools. To me, that's a little bit different than the student achievement, which is.
Well, just on here, it says equity, including student
Right,
performance.
but
the
we don't
student
have to
performance-
start with these.
No, I'm just saying the student performance piece of that would go back to student achievement.
Right. Yeah.
I agree with you, equity and social justice is a separate.
But to John's point, I'm just thinking out loud, to John's point about, giving voice to what our priorities are. Is there a need to articulate that as a separate focus? Kind of to Emerson's point at our last meeting about, giving voice to, this is a priority for us. We're going to close the achievement gap, whatever you want to call it. If we lump it all under student achievement, we might know that's what we mean, but that's not what we're saying. Is there value in saying it?
I see value in separating it out because it's making sure that we give every student a chance for success and not just having all the strategies in place. 'Cause there's a difference. When
So
people
equity as a
slip
value,
through cracks.
equity as a goal in and of itself.
Right.
Other thoughts? I'm just.
Yeah, no, throwing it,
Yeah.
that's what it's supposed to be. I think, yeah, I mean, it could be. I think one of the things that we're really, I think there's such energy and enthusiasm around the work that we're doing in this area. I was reviewing the report that Chris had shared early in the year, and there was a lot of really big celebrations, longitudinal celebrations of the performance specifically of our African American students over the past 7 or 8 years. Like a lot of really big ones. And so what I really would like to do is kind of what I had already started creating was like almost a particular scorecard of self. And the administrators and I have already started brainstorming and talking about this, of looking at particular building-wide objectives, goals, district-wide goals, and then how do we design around the outcomes that we're hoping to see, and really trying to push them to be radical and to be purposeful and so I like that whatever it is, it stands alone, and that there's an achievement component as part of it. And achievement looks broadly, certainly it's not just, but it includes kids reading, of course, but it looks at, what I kind of conveyed to them is it's looking at, I don't remember the language that I used, but it was kind of the achievement that includes things like, or the equity that looks like participation, like how many students of color are participating in our math enrichment programs at our schools. What does our percentage of kids in the reading programs, interventions look like? It should be equitable. We should have about 15% of our kids on a district average in our reading intervention programs. That would be equitable, of color, students of color. So that's participation things that don't necessarily, that will lead to academic performance outcomes in the end. And so how are we looking at equity through that lens and the other as well. So that's one of the things that I'm really going to be working on this summer, which I think would be a great priority, however it's worked.
Well, here, John, you're just going to put all that up under one huge heading and just make it work. Right.
Just make it.
Yeah, let's make it work.
Yeah.
Equity, it might be just equity.
Yeah.
And then you
Right.
have your
That
subtitles.
covers
of that.
a lot of ground right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do consider it a little bit different focus than the achievement, because it is it's a broader quality of life thing, not just test scores.
Yeah.
Well, and what I don't want to get lost if we just use equity is that student achievement component.
Totally.
Because that is,
That's the outcome.
that's correct, and that was the whole initiative to begin. So I don't want that to somehow get, second or third chair.
But I agree the equity side needs to be a separate focused goal, whereas overall student achievement is not any one particular group or comparison of groups, it's district performance as a whole. It's how are we growing our overall aptitude and participation in AP and honors courses and things like in broadening the depth and the breadth of curriculum as well, all falls into that because it's a more all-encompassing goal, whereas equity is specifically a target area where we want to see some measurable goals achieved.
And I think that's the reason why you just can't have goals for 1 year. You need goals for 3 to 5 years. If he's gonna, if his equity is having student equity, that's a goal for maybe 2020.
It's not unlike our financial goal. We're looking at goals
say, nothing has to
15,
come off
20
this
years
list.
down
Yeah.
the road.
Yeah.
That's not, it should be applied to each one of our things. We
Yeah.
need to look at it as short-term, mid-term, long-term,
Yeah.
as achievable.
And with that goal, we need some type of metric that we can measure it against. In 2020, we want this to look like this.
Yeah.
And by that time, that's when we should have it. Otherwise, we're gonna do this exercise again next year.
Yeah.
And just do it for one more year.
Well, and the purpose of this is really where fiscally, how are we aligning our fiscal goals with the goals that we
Exactly.
have? So every meeting, we should be looking at, okay, did we spend the money for in this area that we were supposed to do that? What are the results of that? Okay, we need to beef it up some more. It's all
Do we
intermingles
need
with
to spend
each
money
other.
on technology? Do we need to spend money on,
Yes, correct.
The one,
preschool?
at least from this list, which is great, I see some condensing into, I really see more the ones like Hickson ADA and Moss Field actually rolling into the comprehensive facilities plan as factors within that. So those really all four kind of belong together, with the lead being the comprehensive facilities plan, like I was mentioning to Bruce earlier, about taking into consideration everything that we have, not just buildings, but the facilities that we use for band practice and soccer practice and football and drama and the auditorium and these kinds of things. And again, with that long-term replacement and contingency, those other things fall in. And the other thing with ADA specifically is that what we've seen is that there's only thing constant is change with
Also,
regards to
equities,
what.
and that's an equity issue too.
Exactly, and that is also a
Big
component that can
Big
fall within
equity
it.
issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've always seen how those things can change. There can be more regulations, there could be fluctuating, and sometimes we get grandfathered in and sometimes we don't. And the next thing we invest, we have to, that can be a contingency of, well, if we make the investment in these facilities, we now have to meet these codes which weren't in place 5 years ago when we had this plan initially laid out. That's a contingency that has to be built in. It's like, what kind of legislative regulations are there that we now have to meet 5 or 10 years down the road?
I jotted down a few items. I think I went to sleep in the process, though. It was kind of late at night, but.
Oh, you're not talking about tonight during the meeting?
No, not that. I kind of lumped stuff together in operational goals. You have your finance and your facilities. And then there's stakeholder engagement. That's going to take care of the engagement of your students, families, staff, community workers. And that, there's some communication, what we've been talking about, your curriculum, that's your student achievement, and what you're going to do to improve that. And then talent management, development of high quality workforce, your administrators, your teachers, and your personnel, and then 5 is diversity. So those topics are broad enough where almost all of these items can fall into those categories. And it's just a living document from 1 year to another, just improving the goals.
Well, you mentioned one that was specifically that came to mind, my HR hat kind of jiggled here, which was Sandy's participation in that, because You know, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is the fact that we try to get not only the best teachers, but we tend to maintain our workforce consistently over a longer period of time than a lot of districts do. And, you know, that's something that still needs to be planned for, because not unlike the population in general, we're going to have turnover. And sometimes it's going to be in abilities that we need to replace somebody who, a 30-year teacher with a lot of experience replaced by a 2-year teacher right out of school, basically, or almost right out of school, is not going to necessarily have all the assets built yet. But there's going to be financial implications there and things like that. Not unlike facilities, I don't want to reduce people to things, but you actually have a rolling replacement for your teachers too, because sometimes they're going to need to be replaced.
Talent management, that's the buzzword of
Right.
today, you know, and you have to go out.
Workforce management, workforce
Yeah,
planning,
you
absolutely.
Build for your futures, and that ties into every core item you have. You don't have the talent and the qualified individuals to run it, you almost just throw money away.
Yeah.
And edit, I think it's stakeholder engagement, not stakeholder and engagement. But I like that term too, because it does cover, you know, reaching out to the community as well as to students and staff.
You keep it broad, and you can add a whole lot of stuff up under it.
Do you mean diversity to be separate from equity?
That could be.
Would we put diversity with,
I think there's one, I didn't have any bullets under diversity. I probably was going with, that's a goal that's been part of this board's.
equity, diversity,
Forever.
and social justice? Is that a
Diversity
nice
can be a
umbrella?
component
I
in
like
several
that.
areas, but specifically in talent
Because
management.
mindfulness kind of gets to yoga too much.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Well, with diversity, you know, you can almost,
Equity, diversity, and social justice.
how you
is
have
nice.
your diversity, you know, and your stakeholder engagement, your curriculum, talent management, all that's part of that.
But we want that to be a separate goal.
What's separate?
Diversity, equity,
Equity, diversity, and social justice is up on the first page.
Oh, yeah.
Just drop mindfulness.
everything that Bruce said tonight, you know, falls up under finance and facilities.
I guess I'll say this, it's sad that we have to have separate goals for certain things, that we just don't do them. And it's just not part of who we are, and making sure that we're, how do I say this?
It's afterthought.
A community that's just who we are. We do
It's
that.
ingrained.
And that's just sad.
And that's why I made the plea I did. There've been buzzwords for however long.
Right.
We need to put the resources and the energy behind it to make it work.
Right.
I think the thing that if you're doing this process and you continue this process, you get to that point where it's just a part of your, it's part of your DNA as a district, that you don't necessarily have to make it a goal. And I'm not saying some of these goals and some of the things aren't already part of our DNA.
Right.
It's just we're establishing them and we'll try to say, how can we as a group of 7 plus John, plus everybody that reports to John, what are we doing? It's where are we at now? Where do we want to go? And how quickly can we get there?
You know, Gene, not knocking your idea, but, you know, saying update the strategies, hiring a facilitator. I think I've had enough buzzwords, a lot of slogans that these committees create. That's all they do. You know, they wordsmith stuff to a point where, look at it, doesn't have any meaning to it. As much time as we put in the thematic goals, exciting as it sounded, but when we finish with it, when's the last time we talked about a thematic goal? Long time ago.
Yeah, to me, we've kind of lost track of it, because part of the idea of a strategic plan or these goals is to have out in public what our priorities are.
Right.
So that anyone who's wondering where the Webster Grove School District is heading can look and see, okay, these are their goals. This is what they consider the most urgent, which I like your numbering scheme. So this is going to be a priority for everybody. But then it means that we're not letting things slip through the cracks, because MSIP does require that you have a review.
But that's, you just articulated exactly why we're having this conversation tonight. I will say a little bit in our defense that, last year our goal was hiring a superintendent.
Right,
So
no,
it's not
exactly.
that we didn't do any of the other things, but we
Right.
had to step aside and prioritize that. But I'm really happy that we are refocusing on our priorities right now. Mr. Addison and Ms. Dahl are awfully quiet over there. Do you all have anything you?
I used up all of my,
I'll give you a pass.
He has no more chips to play.
I'll give you a mulligan if you need.
He went all in on Bruce's.
Okay.
the only, all right, so.
I mean,
No.
I just want this is important. I want everybody's voices to be.
So here's my, there's nothing here I can pick up, but I'm still conscious of what we said at the very beginning, which is we need to have 2 or 3 you really focus on, because if you end up with 10, you don't do as good a job. And so as I listen to all of this discussion, I'm very mindful of what Emerson says, which is I've sat through many of the same committees where you come up with something that everybody feels good about, but you never revisit. That strikes me as in the long run, that's probably time that hasn't been spent as wisely as it might have been. It's not you wasted, but, and so as we do this, I would much rather us to work out really what are the board's top few goals. I'd like John to come back with what he sees as his top few goals that we will then review to make sure they're aligned with our view. And you know, if you end up with 3 or 4 for John, 3 or 4 for us, that would seem to be a good place to be.
I'm really happy with the bottom 6 on that as you look at it.
I would say, that's what I was going to ask, the general categories that Emerson proposed. Do we feel, I feel like that he did a good job.
Student achievement, yeah, big choice.
Yeah,
It's a good way of covering everything
it's a good way of covering everything.
Yeah.
and not ending up with 17 goals.
And he did that while asleep. That was pretty good.
Yeah, I did go to sleep. I know I did. I was sitting up at the machine and said, oh, when I want to be sitting up here.
Okay, it's bottom 5,
So this one,
Well,
and then add innovation somewhere.
I thought innovation was going to be part of curriculum and student achievement.
Okay?
Yep.
Curriculum, innovation, and student achievement. That makes sense.
I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I think you're right.
these
1, 2, 3,
Yeah,
4, 5.
those
You've got
5.
everything covered.
count on.
Excellent.
Thoughts, David? Is that you'd like to further synthesize, or?
It just strikes me that the exercise we went through 10 seconds ago, we just went and basically said we've got 6 and we went and stuck innovation in there just for the sake of it. If I'm very honest with you, I mean, this is what, every time we do this, what we do is we go and say, we like 10 of these things, and we don't ever actually go and prioritize. What we do is we go and change the name so we've got 6
All
things
10, but in
included
5
there.
categories.
Yeah, and
I
it's,
thought we were going to keep all the specifics underneath there. I didn't
Right.
think
You
they
have
were.
subcategories.
Yeah, I thought. I just thought that was a general way of breaking them down, and then we'd still have the sub.
This is the what, so all we need to find out
Yeah.
now is the how. And that's where our goals for John come in, and John has for his administrators have for the teachers on down the road.
Operational finance and facilities doesn't really say an adjective. I mean, it sounds like a to-do list. I mean, do we want to say sustainable operations, finance and facilities?
Under that
or-
category, you have pretty much what Bruce talked about tonight, having the fund balanced by 2020.
Right, so a lot of what he was talking about was sustainability, strong, the smart, right smart, whatever. I just wanted to say somehow that we are going to be fiscally responsible with our operations, or that what is the purpose? Because obviously you have to do finance and
Well, the
facilities.
goal is, although he went out to 2045,
Right,
to have our general fund balance at this dollar amount by 2020, 2023. And that's what we're going to shoot for.
right.
Or would the goal be, these are a lot of strategies as I view this, would the goal be fiscal responsibility? Or fiscal, sustainability, which does lead into some other things. We're kind of talking more strategy than we're talking, goals are very broad,
Right.
and they're very specific, and I think we need to make them such that the staff, you could walk up to a staff member, most mission statements are like this, I like ours is like this,
Right.
because it's very concise and you can remember it. I think our goals need to be the same way, Is it fine? I'm just going to just rattle things off. Finances and achievement, and engagement of community and staff, or engagement of everybody, all stakeholders. I'm just making that up right now. And then some of these things fall underneath as strategies, because right now we have some kind of strategies and a little bit of goals and.
I actually like administration to take it back and meet together as a team and work on those 6 or 5 topics and come back to us with.
So that we don't lose the details to which David was referring.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, because I see development of a comprehensive facilities plan, a strategy of a broader goal of excellent learning facilities. Provide the best learning facilities we can provide. And part of that is development of a comprehensive facilities plan.
There you go.
So I like right, smart, finance, and facilities.
There you go.
Because remember, we don't want to get things rusty. But anyway, some kind of positive there that we want to have thoughtful plan in regard to our finances and facilities.
John, thoughts?
Well, we could certainly come up with some narrowed goals based on this.
Do you feel like
and
you
then develop.
have direction?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't want to David's point, I don't want to have it be so all-encompassing that we just fit everything underneath, because I want to be able to narrow it for a focus, since this is 17, 18, although I do like it being ongoing.
You can put as many items as you want, just using facilities as you want. But for the next 3 years, here are the 4 or 5 things that we're going to focus on.
Right.
And when one thing rolls off, then you look at the bottom, which one we want to bring up to the
Right.
working.
Yeah.
So you always have something in the hopper to be working on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah, we can
timing
do that.
element of saying the facilities plan is going to be next April. When is this plan going to be presented? So it's not all coming due in April.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. We can do that.
Because we get this plan. So what?
Right.
Let's
We have to
implement the
hold
plan.
them, yeah, and we
Right.
have to make sure we
What are the
monitor
top,
and-
we were saying here, what are the top things that need to be addressed like now?
And
And you
then-
want to be simple enough where they can be shared with the community and they
Yep.
understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then that will help you schedule meetings of what kind of reports we have on which subtopics.
Right.
Well, and you
Yeah.
can set realistic timelines for each and every one, because you have, just as you would have a 60, 90, 120-day plan, you have a 1, 2, 3, 5, 10-year plan, and can say, we can hold off this for 5, but we better sure as heck not hold off for more than 3 in here. And that gives you some really attainable things, so that down the road, whoever's sitting around this table in 3 years can say, did we meet that?
David?
So to the extent what we're talking about here is board goals, I'm a little, I understand what Em's suggesting in saying that the administration go back and think about it, but I think we still have to remember these are board goals, and so they need to come from that. So I guess what I'd ask is, as you're doing that, if you can also think in terms of how you, leading the administration, would then set your goals to sort of achieve that, so that we sort of see how both pieces come together. To Emerson's, I think the approach Emerson's taking is very good. Is very good here in terms of just how do you actually get things done? How do you measure you're getting things done? I think that the board can go through and can prioritize this, but if we know also what it is, how you're envisaging it fitting in underneath, I think that will help us with that exercise.
Yeah. Yes, it does.
That rolls down to your staff.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
all right. Other thoughts? John, you good?
Yeah.
Thank you, guys, I appreciate that conversation.
Just one just practical question. Timing to go and do
Yeah,
this,
that's a good point.
and then can we have it as a follow-up item on an agenda, just so we don't lose track. And I don't want to put pressure on you in terms of when you think we're reasonable. Tell us what a reasonable time to get this done would be.
Give us some thought, John. and get
Yeah, we
back
only
to
got
us.
the one meeting coming up.
Yeah.
I don't mind wait.
I
I'd
was
rather
thinking
wait
into
a couple
summer
of meetings
because
and have something that's
maybe-
comprehensive
yeah.
and has given you time to
That's
think
what I
about
want.
it.
That's what my.
I'd much rather go that way, because then
Yeah.
we'll go much more
For
into
sure.
conversation.
I was gonna say, we could wordsmith and do these 5, but I would really like to create something that speaks to what you're saying. which I think, you know, the late August meeting is certainly.
We say it's August or September, I mean, I'm fine with that,
Yeah.
as long as we're moving forward.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, thank you.
I'm excited to do it,
Yeah,
actually.
me too. Okay. Notice how these topics are all interrelated. The next item is district committees and board liaison assignments. And the draft that I guess John started it, I worked on it a little bit. Initially though, and I'm gonna let you talk, John, there are some committees that are no longer on this list that are on the old list. So many of us have had conversations about looking at the roles and functions of our committees and do they still serve a useful purpose. John has taken a first crack at slimming that list down, so I'll let you talk.
Yeah, so I worked with our folks here to just kind of, I asked each of them to give me a little synopsis of what their committee did. And really, you know, what was the essentiality of the committee, and then their thoughts regarding board involvement on the committee. And this is what we ended up coming up with. I delineated on that list between what's a board committee and what's a district committee as being different. So anyway, so we kind of drafted this, and then we put some names in there. Some of them were names of people who had been on the committee for a while, had been liaisons to the schools for the while, but this was really meant to be just kind of our starting point for the discussion if somebody has a particular committee or group that they want to be a part of.
And I guess let's start with sort of broad level. Are there any committees that are not on here that we think we will miss?
Yeah.
Are there any on here that we think we maybe don't need or would want to, you know, we would like more of an explanation for what that committee does?
Yeah, I think wasn't wellness one of those committees we asked about?
Yeah, I know we talked about it at our meeting.
Oh, did, okay.
And that's why I volunteered for it.
Well, there was also a Unite committee, but those ended up kind of being the same person and kind of the same, because I don't think yeah,
So kind of blend together.
right.
Okay. So I mentioned that one of our planning meetings that I see a lot of opportunity for things like looking at district's food service and possibility of, you know, raising some of our own food, and, you know, like Maplewood has their own personal chef, and looking at doing those kinds of things I think would be interesting. I can't remember what the other one was. School start times, things like that. I think there's some potentially really interesting things that we could do, that a wellness committee could do. So I volunteered for that, but if somebody else would like to take it, I would step aside. Or also, several of these, I only put one name on there. Obviously, any of us can go to any of these, but if there's another one that you'd like to be on that you're not on.
My only
There
comment
can be two.
to that was, we've almost always had 2 liaisons identified.
For the buildings?
For each building.
Yeah, David had the same comment.
And that maybe, while it doesn't necessarily have to be 2 full-time, it could be a main and an alternate. But I think having 2 is nice.
When I put this together, my thought was, because I did do that consciously, my thought was to try to minimize everybody's time commitment, but thought perhaps the alternate idea isn't such a bad idea.
I thought that. The other thing was that we need a representative to Webster.
Yeah, I noticed that as well.
There's not a city representative to Webster on there.
I saw that.
And I know David is the
is
Parks and Recs, but the representative to Webster encompasses more than just that. And
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know whether he wants to be the Webster rep as well as the Parks and Rec person, because I
Wants to
mean,
be
we really
Mr.
only
Webster.
you really only do that
No.
once. But, you know, it is, we do have the
Look at
5
us.
communities, and that one was missing.
Yeah, that's right.
Arnold said he'd do
I'll
it.
do that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Arnold.
Yeah.
And then
I-
the other thing was the MSBA, I think it's just one person and an alternate, whereas we have Jean and I listed. I know that in the past,
Oh, yeah, that's a mistake.
you were the main and I was the alternate, or Michael was the alternate at one point, and then I took over when he couldn't be there. It doesn't matter to me, it can be either Jean or I, and the other one can serve as the alternate.
That's a typo. I intended for it to be Jean,
Jean
and
with
for
me
you to
as
be
the
the
alternate,
alternate.
perfect,
Yes.
yeah. Because I know you probably did it at the leadership conference, because I
June.
think you
I
and
did,
Joe were the
so,
only ones
Yeah, I'd like to
there.
continue just because they're voting on the policies now in October.
Okay.
And I heard the input. Wellness, I'm very interested in as well. If they end up meeting during the day and you can attend, Amy, I
That'd be
would
great.
be happy to be your alternate on
That'd be
that.
great.
Also, we had discussed having issues and meet and confer
Yeah.
not be separate because they're often during the day, and it was kind of weird to have Emerson tag team. Okay, now we're on when we're talking about money, where the issues committee usually met first, and then it was meet and confer.
That was one of the ideas that they had come up with is do we need to separate the board representation on that or and that's up to you guys really, or would you like to have just this be the one person? So meet and confer and issues, just for Joe, is they usually meet, if they meet one after the other. If there's a necessity for one of them, just one of them to come together, they'll do that, but often it's the same.
My concern would only be continuing to serve on it would be the timing of the meetings. Just simply because, I mean, if they're gonna try to meet before 5 o'clock, that's almost impossible for me.
Have you guys ever met, did you guys meet early? I think they'll continue the same time.
They got really early.
Oh, did they really?
Oh, it was like, yeah, 3:15 for issues, I think.
I think the issues group was meeting like right after school,
Yeah,
and then we
I
were
can't.
starting at like 5 or 5:30 for meet and confer.
I think those were those late nights when we knew that it was gonna go really long, but in general, I don't recall it starting at 3:45.
Well, I wasn't on the issue, so I don't know,
But we
but,
can talk about the time, it's gonna be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like them being separate. I think they're very separate committees. I think I've never been on meet and confer, full disclosure, but issues isn't necessarily, in fact, usually it's not financial stuff. It's HR, it's personnel stuff, it's sometimes student stuff.
Building stuff.
Yeah. And
It's just the
I
timing
feel
of
like
the
they're
meetings
separate.
that makes it.
And the
seem
meeting time
together.
shouldn't dictate the members of the committee, I don't think. And board, at least the board representatives, David.
I've served on both at
Okay.
times, and I do see them as different. I think there's an advantage to, in many respects, to because you're talking about different issues and different things, and because you can compartmentalize them, I do think there's an advantage in although the committee members are exactly the same from everybody else, other than the board members, I think there's an advantage to compartmentalizing the two sort of sets of things. And so,
Yes.
having served on both, I think having them separate is a better way to go.
It's perfect.
I agree.
It was mainly just thinking of you guys, so that's fine.
Okay, thank you. One question I had is, can we identify who the administrator coordinating person is going to be for each of these committees?
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah,
Who's
yeah.
setting the time of the meetings
Yeah.
and sending out the
Like,
notices?
so who's responsible?
Like I know Sandy normally send out the issues.
So wellness, who's that gonna be?
John.
John.
John, so then John would need to, he would be the contact person, or the
And
point
legislative
person.
advocacy, is that you, John?
That's
Simpson?
me.
Let's just add all of those details to this grid if we could.
I can add that and update it.
That'd be good.
Yeah.
Anybody have any requests for assignments, reassignments?
So to Steve's point about the building liaisons, I mean the school liaison, the elementary school liaisons is something that I find, I try to go once, twice a year. I do find it's useful. I do find it's useful to go there. Why are you here? I'm a board member, I'm the liaison to your school. So I find that to be a useful thing. I'd be interested in taking a couple more elementary school liaisons. If that was okay, if we were going to go with sort of 2 for each of the elementaries, and I do think it would be a better way to go.
Can I raise because I actually disagree with you on that, and only
Absolutely.
that I have not found it useful. I have struggled with what should I be doing for them? I feel like there's not direction. Because, for a while we would go to the open houses, but then they started doing videos, and I don't know we were trying to do bagels at one point, breakfast at the schools, and then we
I
stopped
like
doing
if
that.
it's one person,
I think
because
we
then
need
if somebody has a
clarification
concern, they
on
know
what
who
that
to contact.
relationship is before, because if you're right, if there's stuff to do, then it makes sense to have more than one person, but I never know what I'm supposed to be doing.
So what I do
To be
is
honest.
I will go to 1 or 2 board meetings, to 1 or 2 PDO meetings a year, and I will, if they've got a social activity, parent social activity, I may go along to one of those.
I think at the PTO meetings, it's nice to give them an update, what the board is up to. I know the high school people really appreciate that.
Yeah. No, I don't now. Whereas the board PTO rep typically goes every time, I don't go to every meeting, and I'm not actually going there to give an update. It's more, here's a face. And frankly, what I'd say is that certainly in the past, I think some board members have been to more PTO meetings than others throughout. I mean, I think Clark has sort of got, between the various people who've all come through Clark gets inundated with those. I think that some of the other schools may not get anybody going and seeing them at all. I mean, I had in the elementaries, I had Avery and Edgar Road last year, and I went to stuff for both of those throughout the year.
Do you think it would be worthwhile to reach out to any of the building administrators to see
I was just wondering that.
if they,
I think so.
if there's something that we could provide?
Nancy always invited me
Yeah,
to the first day of
expectations.
school.
Yeah, because while I have gone, and specifically, it seems like I've been more active at Hudson than I have anywhere else, even though I've been represented a couple of, but Lisa's always been very, very kind about saying, hey, and Steve's here again to support, hey, blah, 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 if you have any questions or anything. And I don't go with a specific bullet points to talk about, but it always seems like something comes up that somebody looks and says, well, what has the board talked about with that? And then you're there to answer it.
Yeah, Julie and Tony have been the same way when I've gone to those.
I'm sorry?
Julie and Tony are both the same way when I go at Edgar Road, or if I go to Avery as well.
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily has to be too designated. It could be, that's why I said the alternate might be nice, just because that way you can kind of say, well, I'm planning on going to a couple things, but if you want to do one, just let me know if you have a specific thing that you want to go to, and I probably won't go that night, because it's your opportunity.
I think that, the alternate idea sounds like a good one.
Let's do this, because my brain's getting tired. If anybody wants to be an alternate for anything that they're not currently on, will you please shoot me an email? And we'll revise it. I'll get it to John and we'll revise it.
Sure.
I had another
Yes.
question. We don't have a foundation liaison listed. We've had that in the past.
I
there
thought I
is.
had David on there.
David,
Yes.
second page, lower right-hand corner.
Yes.
Okay, good,
I checked and he agreed.
great.
Sorry, anything else on the
The
details?
only thing, the city liaisons, probably same thing like with the building liaisons, maybe once, twice a year, as a board rep, go take out 3 minutes at the
Yeah.
city hall meetings.
That was part of our communication plan, was
Right.
kind of organizing that. And the thought was, after our kind of state of the district thing, was to go prepare something, a synopsis, and then go with the liaison to an upcoming meeting.
Right.
So, yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I would still like to see us at some point in time reach out and invite each of because John and I talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, we did.
But right before he got on board and found out he had to hire 82 people.
Yeah.
That to actually go, because we have never had the Glendale folks in, we've never had the Warsonwood folks in. We rarely get to see the Shrewsbury folks. I mean, there's once in a while, I know Ed Kopp would come to the Legislative Advocacy Committee once in a while, but, and Felicity is maybe a little bit more active as far as, but I know Rock Hill, honestly, even with Edward Mahan being a graduate of the high school, we probably got more involved when Daniel was the mayor than we have since Eddie's been in there. But I'd love to reach out and bring him and his group in at some point in time. Just invite him to come for a tour and a sit down with, even if it's just 2 or 3 of us, the rep and maybe 1 or 2 other people, just to say, hey, come in, have some coffee. We're going to take you through the new addition, the high school, or the school that's in your drawing area. That most of your kids that come from that area, if it's Warson Woods and they go to Hudson, invite them to Hudson, and then whoever wants to go up and take a tour of the high school, if you haven't been through it, we'll do that too.
Sure.
That's a great idea, and then maybe we could ask to tour the new fire halls in Glendale and
Yeah.
Rock Hill once they're built. I miss the grand, what do they call it, the
Yeah.
I mean, if we-
groundbreaking for,
And I mean, I don't ever want to discount the fact that we may only have maybe 80 kids that come from that community, but that's still 80 kids, and they're important kids, and their parents are important, and their stakeholders are important. So it would be nice for that leadership to say, hey, you know what, the Webster School District did a really nice job having us over, or we really enjoyed that. We hadn't done that ever, in some cases. That I really want. I was hoping to accomplish that during my year as president. We just got away from it and couldn't get to it.
Okay.
But I'd love to see it as a board goal.
I'm not sure we need to list TIF. I mean, if that happens to come up, I think we can go and revisit it, but I'm not sure that it needs to be listed as such.
Okay. Agree.
Yeah.
Do we need a liaison to the North Webster Alliance?
or the Alliance for Interracial Dignity.
I would say no. Let's no. Tell me your,
Well, I'm trying to think of. I'm trying to
Do we
figure out
all
the
get,
line.
do we all get the alliance and that communication? Do you guys all get those emails of those meetings that are coming? So, I mean, I don't think it necessarily has to be something formal, but I do
I don't get
encourage you all to go. Joel, I'm
I
sorry,
don't
what's
get
your?
any emails.
Okay,
Oh, Sarah
then
was at you.
we can make sure that Sarah and the other people that are involved in those couple of groups get you on their email blast.
I don't ever see anything for the North Webster Alliance. I get the Alliance, I get the Alliance for Intellectual Dignity.
Me too.
Stuff like that.
I attend the meetings.
And we have a
Because I'm-
liaison.
I'm a member of the North Webster, so, and I do give updates whenever. I don't know, it's 6 in one hand, half a dozen the other.
But I know Gene's been to several, or Emerson has, I know Arnold and I have both been occasionally here and there to different things, both to the North Webster and to the Alliance, so.
Yeah, Gene and I have certainly been to recent Alliance meetings. And that was-
Yeah, I was the
I don't
only
think
one
they
at
have,
last week, so
as
I
long as
read
we're
our
on the
proclamation.
communication side, I think that's, you know,
Okay.
that allows us freedom to go if we need to, or want to.
Sorry, can I, big picture, wrap up real quick on this subject?
Mhm.
Do we still feel like we need to revisit the purpose of all of our committees? To your point earlier this evening, you had that as a board goal. Is this still a board goal? Do we feel like this has been something we've talked about a lot as needing to discuss and/or change? I just want to know if it's an ongoing action item or if we are good for now.
I would like for administration to look at these at the same time they look at the goals, to see where they
Yeah.
fit in the overall
I like that.
strategic goals of the district.
I like that.
And as they're doing that, I'd like to see what the goals are, something more prominent in terms of what the actual goals of the committee are and how you measure success.
Yeah.
If they find a committee that's not really pertinent to any of the goals, then let's think about this.
That's why we took some of them off.
Yeah.
We thought these all still served a valuable function. But I think there's a necessity for better communication of what the work of the groups.
Because a few of these are administratively necessary. It doesn't mean that you have a lofty goal. I mean, when you're talking about meet and confer, it's just an administrative part of running the business. It's not something that your goal 2 years from now is going to be that much different than your goal 10 years or 20 years from now. It's probably a little bit different kind of community or committee.
Amy, if I'm going to be an alternative with you at wellness, Joe just said she'd be willing to take over calendar. I think that might be a good slot for her.
Who's on calendar now? You?
I am.
Okay, yeah, sure.
I want to make sure you're fully utilized.
Let's talk about.
Just the-
My name's set up.
You're up.
No,
I was on
David
calendar.
always
Okay,
wanted to be
one
on
last-
calendar, and they wouldn't let him.
And then I got put on calendar and then I couldn't do it.
One last subject or clarification on the point of committees. We realize there are maybe some, and I think it may differ from committee to committee, what our role as a board member actually is.
Yeah, our role is not to be an active participant in the meeting, just to be there to observe and bring back information to the board.
But that's true for some committees, but not all.
Not
right?
all,
Like
right.
David said, he votes on the park board, right?
Well, I'm on park board. I'm not an observer. I am a park board member. I'm actually appointed by the city council
So he's
on
not
the
really a
recommendation
liaison.
of the district. So it's a little
Yeah,
bit different.
yeah.
Yeah,
Same
But-
thing with
but-
SSD for me, because I actually vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, but on something like my
And I think
representation of
that's
finance is
something-
just there to go and listen and
Yeah.
be
report
listed
back.
that's something you actually are a active member of.
Right.
Okay.
You know, and I just use calendar for example. I've been on calendar, I think, for 2 or 3 years, and I just go there to observe. I think I put my 2 cents in only one time during the calendar meetings. So it's
Like
just-
when you knew something just was not going to probably fly.
Well, I've had questions, you know, and I think it can be a good role as a board to understand, you know, if there's a
Right, as
question.
long as we don't commandeer the meeting and
Right.
take it over.
It's not our,
Right.
It's
right.
not our place to
Yeah.
do
It's
that.
not our meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's place for contribution, but certainly like in this case, Joe will be ultimately, you'll approve it. So I'm like, it's just like, I always try to be cognizant if I open my mouth and people are gonna think, oh, that idea is already discounted or, you know, so it's just being cognizant of.
Right. And, you know, I was at support when they brought the calendar to the board for approval. I can attest to the process they went through, that it was,
Yeah.
you know, competitive, I mean, everything went well and supported. But as far as taking over the meeting, that just wasn't my role.
Yeah, okay. All right. At this time, I believe we have item 12 of the revised agenda, which is public comments. And I didn't read this at the beginning, so I'll read it now. School board welcomes questions, ideas, comments from persons in attendance. Members of the audience may comment during the public comment portion of the meeting when recognized by the board president. We ask that comments be limited to 3 minutes in order to complete the agenda within a reasonable time. We also ask that comments begin by providing your name, address, and the school district in which you reside. Would anyone like to make a comment this evening? Oh, I read all that for nothing. Okay. Consent agenda. You guys received all of these as part of your board packet.
I make a motion that we approve consent agenda items 12A.
I think it's 13. now.
13, yes.
13B, 13A, 13B, 13C, 13D, 13E1, 13E2, 13E3, 13E4, and 13E5.
All in favor? Any discussion? Never mind, it's consent. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Make a motion to executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel, litigation, and property as needed.
I'll second that.
All in favor, roll call, please.
Mr. Addison?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowd?
Yes.
Mrs. Dugan?
Yes.
Mr. Newman?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes,
Mr. Moore?
Yeah.
Yes.
always one.